brings us to tonight. And I'm very happy to welcome back one of our favorite speakers, Jeff Cohen, to our Zoom podium. Jeff is coming to us from New York. He is the Roots Action co-founder and policy advisor. He's also founder of the Media Watch Group there and a media critic, a columnist, a documentary filmmaker, and a retired journalism professor. So tonight, he's going to talk to us about Biden's first 100 days and where do we go now? And he's interested in your questions and having a discussion. And with that, I will turn it off to Jeff, over to Jeff.
Okay, I just unmuted myself. So it's great to be with you. I just want to toss out some ideas. I have monitored the first 100 days of Joe Biden's administration and beyond. And I'll give you a little, I speak to you not as a journalism professor or a media critic, but as a social activist. And it's my belief as I study history that the biggest mistake progressive activists, peace and justice activists can ever make is when the Democrats get elected, we take our foot off of the gas and we relax and we assume, oh, we've thrown out the right wing, the racist Republicans, we can relax now. That's the wrong approach. I think history shows us that if the Democratic leadership is left to its own devices, with all the pressure they get to be bipartisan, with their instinct toward compromise, with their instinct toward satisfying big corporations, if there's no pressure from the grassroots, no pressure from progressives, things go very, very wrong. Bill Clinton was elected in November '92. Democratic House, Democratic Senate. We got NAFTA, we got dithering, we got compromise, and the Republicans came storming back in '94, November '94, with the Gingrich right-wing revolution. They took over the House. Same thing with Barack Obama. People were so thrilled. Here's our first African-American president. He's young, he's hip. Let's not polarize with him. Let's ease off because he's going to have enough problems with the right wing and McConnell. And it was exactly the wrong approach. There was too much dithering from Obama. They bailed out Wall Street, but they didn't bail out the middle-class taxpayer. It was the biggest foreclosure disaster in the history of the country. Disproportionately, African-American families lost their homes. There was too much compromise. There was compromise on the stimulus, which many even middle of the road economists said has to be bigger, but the Obama-Biden administration insisted on compromise and watering it down. And then in 2010, the right wing was just completely coming back full tilt. So the reason I say that progressive activists have to intensify and not relax is because Team Biden left to themselves will screw up. I'm going to be blunt. We're a bunch of activists. I don't have to be diplomatic. They're going to screw up. Left to Biden's own instincts, he'll compromise, he'll dither, and frankly, things are not going well. If the Democrats don't deliver more than what they've done, the Republicans will come storming back in the off-year 2022 congressional elections, which are often low turnout elections. So as I analyze what Biden has done, and you'll know that Roots Action started the Vote Trump Out movement and then challenged Biden. After we vote Trump out, we were very active in voting Trump out in Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona, all wins, all defeats for Trump and wins for us. But we always understood that the next step in the two-step process is we challenge Biden for the full progressive agenda, because unless progressive change is made for the multiracial, working class, poor, middle class, young people. They will not turn out in 2022. So as the advertisement for this night's event said, I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the mixed. The good is the American Rescue Plan. It's the only legislative achievement, was the big rescue plan. It had a lot of good things in it. Unfortunately, they took the $15 federal minimum wage out to satisfy a few corporate Democrats. And Biden didn't either have the strength of conviction or strength of politics to get the Democrats to support the $15 federal minimum wage. So instead, we have an executive order from Biden saying that all federal contracts have to pay their workers $15 minimum wage. That's a good thing. And it affected about 400,000 workers. But a federal $15 minimum wage, if put in the rescue plan, would have immediately raised the wages of 40 million people. And if you raise the wages of the people at the very bottom, it's pretty good for other people, other working people's wages. So that was a disappointment, but generally a very important legislative achievement. There were some good executive orders in the area of environment, in the area of social policy. There was even a reversal today on trans rights. But there are a lot of executive orders that Biden has refused. And it's pretty devastating that he has refused. To me, the most important executive order that never came is the president's authority under the Higher Education Act of 1965. We know that the president's got this authority to fix or change or excuse federal student loan debt. And Schumer is not exactly a left-wing senator, the leading Democratic senator. He's been tweeting and pushing on Biden to excuse up to $50,000 in student debt for all those carrying the debt. There's about $1.7 trillion in federal student debt held by 45 million people. Again, it's disproportionately African Americans and people of color. And if this were to happen, it would be a stimulus to the economy that McConnell could not stop. People that are holding back on starting a business or starting a family or buying a house, it would really stimulate the economy. Professionals that are in jobs they don't like lawyers who are in corporate law firms, but would rather represent middle class, working class, poor people. They could switch jobs if their student loans were forgiven. It would be an incredible thing. I think that alone might win the November 2022 election, but Biden's adamant against it. He did promise during the campaign for president that he would excuse $10,000 of federal student loan debt for each person that has that much, and then he hasn't talked about it since. In terms of appointments and who was appointed and who wasn't, and there's this good phrase that personnel is policy, because Biden can't oversee every cabinet. It really matters who he chooses. There have been some god-awful choices, like Tom Vilsack is the Secretary of Agriculture again. He offended African-American farmers and other small farmers in his 8 years as Obama's Secretary of Agriculture. He's known as Mr. Monsanto. He's completely allied with big ag, the big ag monopolies. He came to the job for Biden as the Secretary of Agriculture right from being the chief lobbyist for the dairy industry. Those kind there, and he's not the only one. Gina Raimondo, a former venture capitalist, is the Secretary of Commerce. There have been some good appointments, a lot of good economic advisors, some good environmental appointments. And I want to again stress that sometimes the good things that Biden does is because of pressure. And he's had constant pressure. I'm happy to say that Biden has had far more pressure than Obama did. at the outset of the administrations. For example, it was said in news reports that Biden was going to choose Ernest Moniz to again be the Secretary of Energy. And Moniz is in the pocket of oil and gas and nuclear industry. He's not good. And Greenpeace and groups like ours raised holy hell and said, no way you're going to appoint Moniz, and petitions and threats of demonstrations. And instead of Moniz, Biden chose your former governor, Jennifer Granholm, who actually supported the Standing Rock protesters and is actually on record as saying, look, we're going to have to leave some of this fossil fuel in the ground, which is not something that secretaries of energy have said in the past. So to the degree that there have been some good appointments, sometimes it's been because of activism. Roots Action yelled and screamed about Michelle Flournoy, who's an ideological war hawk that was going to be the Secretary of Defense, and she wasn't even nominated. We got good coverage even in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, about her connections to military industrial contractors. Some good appointments, some bad appointments. The worst appointments are in the area of military and national security. It's awful. There's a group, I encourage you to go online, the Revolving Door Project are a bunch of researchers that look at whether industries have captured different departments of the executive branch of the government. And they gave Biden a B- in general because Biden actually did better than Obama in keeping Wall Street off of his economic team and out of his financial team. And did okay in keeping fossil fuel industry from capturing energy and environment. But that same project, those researchers at the Revolving Door Project, they gave Biden a D- for who he's appointed as foreign policy team, and pointed out how many were war hawks that had come out of this one think tank called the Center for a New American Security. It's funded by Northrop and Lockheed, and a bunch of these people are now running State Department and other departments. So the worst thing in terms of budgeting, you might have heard in the last few weeks when we got a look at Biden's budget, how disappointed people were, that there were all sorts of campaign pledges that had disappeared. There's no talk anymore of a public option in healthcare that would compete with private insurance plans. There's no talk of a plan to bring down pharmaceutical prices. Obviously, he's not even talking about the $10,000 in foregoing of federal student loan debt. But the worst thing in my view is, and this is important for you guys at a Peace and Justice group, is we know that there's a reason, a big reason why other advanced industrial countries have free or very inexpensive higher ed, why they have decent, often high quality universal health care, and we're the only wealthy country that does not have those things. And I would say one of the main reasons, perhaps the main reason, is we, unlike these other societies in Europe and elsewhere, we take $750 billion and give it to the Pentagon. And in terms of military and nukes, it's $1 trillion a year. And after Donald Trump, the ethno-nationalist, had bragged about how he rebuilt the military because Obama Biden had destroyed the military. That would be news to the military. But that was Trump's rhetoric. Every year he bloated the military budget more. He drained money away that could go to healthcare, education, environment, and put it to the military. And what has Biden done? He's raised the military budget even more. He wants to modernize our nuclear weapons. That's an error. He's got on his national security team all these people that seem to want to stoke a new Cold War with China and Russia. And there's no excuse for draining all of this money to the military budget. So again, there have been some good things, some good appointments, some good executive orders. I think I mentioned Deb Haaland, the Native American. She's the Secretary of Interior. That's a great appointment. There have been other good ones in economic advisors, but it's a mixed record. And the only way that progressives will get anything close to what the public needs, because the progressive agenda is not only popular, it's what working people and middle class people and poor people need. They don't need halfway measures. For 40 years, wealth and income has gushed to the top. The division between rich and poor, and by rich, I don't mean upper middle class lawyers and professors. I mean the people who run the society, has never been greater. And we can't do halfway measures. If you do halfway measures, the right-wing phony populists will come back into power. I should mention, there was one last point I wanted to make. Maybe I'll remember it as we go to questions and answers. But progressive activism is crucial to keeping them honest. If you leave Biden to his own impulses, we know this from watching him for 40 years. His impulse is to negotiate, 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 water down, water down. That's the Republican trick. That's their playbook. That's how they will win big for House and Senate in 2022. And if you read Huffington Post today, they have a great article about how a number of Democratic senators, not just Bernie, but even middle of the road Democratic senators are really upset that Biden is screwing up with the jobs plan, which the Republicans like to call the infrastructure plan. But as Biden unfurled it, it was infrastructure plus. It was human infrastructure as well as roads and bridges. If you read Huffington Post today, you'll see how many Democratic senators are really irate with Biden because there are these 5 moderate Republicans, so-called, and 5 moderate Democrats. I don't call them moderate Democrats. They're basically corporatist Democrats. They're coming up with this compromise, and this compromise will not get things done. And thankfully, there's a lot of senators that are saying no, that Markey said, if you don't have climate, there's no deal. If you take out the climate infrastructure, the green jobs that were part of the American families, the American jobs plan, it just plays into Republican hands. If you water it down and make it a half or 2/5 as big as it needs to be, it helps the Republicans win in 2022. And here's my final point that I was trying to remember. Marist does these national polls, including everyone, Republicans, Democrats, independents, people that don't vote a lot, people that do vote a lot. And when they explain the American jobs plan, it was popular. There was majority support for it. They, in a couple sentences, they explained what Biden was proposing. And then when they said, this will be paid for by increasing the taxes on big corporations and the wealthiest Americans, the popularity shoots up. There's nothing more popular than taxing those, and we know from the last week or two, because of ProPublica's great journalism, that rich people basically don't pay taxes. Big profit-making corporations don't pay taxes. So when you increase taxes on the rich to deliver benefits to the middle class, working class, and the poor, that's extremely popular, even with some Republicans. That's what the scientific polls show. And so if you read Huffington Post today, you'll see that the smarter Democrats in the Senate say that, I mean, the main thing that the 5 moderate Republicans who are working with the 5 corporatist Democrats to undercut the original Biden plan. The main thing they're doing is they're stopping all tax increases on the wealthy and the big corporations, and they're going to increase taxes on the middle class through electric car user fees, make the gas tax, peg it to inflation. All these taxes will hit the middle class and the working class. That's a way to lose elections. I'll stop here and
We have some questions. Yeah, there are some questions in the chat. I'll read them. So first one is about Biden being on his way home after attending the European Union meetings and the meeting with Putin earlier today. Any insights on that?
Yeah, again, I'm not a big fan of NATO. NATO was involved in the so-called longest war we've ever had. It was insane. We were saying years and years ago, you can't occupy Afghanistan and win. No one's ever been able to do it. And that was NATO. What does NATO have to do with Afghanistan? NATO was the North American Treaty Organization set up to prevent Soviet expansion in Europe. And now he's got NATO, NATO wants to get involved in the pivot toward China, blocking China. Again, I want to cut the military budget in half. I want to take that money and give it to working people, and in terms of healthcare and education and environment and housing, affordable housing. We can make our society just, but you can't have guns and butter. So my main objection to the trip, Biden's trip to Europe with Tony Blinken, his Secretary of State, who was a supporter of the Iraq invasion, along with Joe Biden, was a disaster. Blinken was involved in the overthrow of Gaddafi, which was another disaster. You can't just go around overthrowing autocrats in the Middle East without thinking that, gee, this might help Al-Qaeda or terrorist groups that are worse. So he's got a horrible foreign policy team. His instincts are, I think, belligerence rather than diplomacy. He sometimes says good things about diplomacy, but then he doesn't follow through. Putin is an autocrat, but 90% of the nuclear weapons are in the hands of the US or the Russian Federation, 90%. And you've got to segregate that issue from the other issues. And you've got to say, we're going to begin disarmament. We're going to continue even what Gorbachev and Reagan did. We're going to continue. You'll remember in 1965, LBJ, he's escalating the war in Vietnam. I think it was Brezhnev and Kosygin. They had certainly less personal freedom and freedom of the press in the old Soviet Union in the middle 60s than there's freedom today. But they went to Glassboro, New Jersey, and they talked about the spirit of Glassboro, that we have to do something about reducing the threat of nuclear weapons. And the expert that I rely on when it comes to that threat is someone who's worked on it his whole life, and that's Daniel Ellsberg. And the experts say we're 100 seconds before midnight. We still run this risk of accidental nuclear war. We really have to put that separate and deal with Putin. Putin's ready to start disarming on nuclear weapons and take things off of hair trigger. The ICBMs are the most dangerous nuclear weapons, and those are ones that Biden wants to modernize. Those are the ones we want to dismember and disable.
Okay, next question. What to do about Senator Manchin and the senator from Arizona?
Yeah, Senator Sinema. Well, first of all, Biden's got to get straight in his head, and Team Biden, that they really want to move the country in an FDR direction, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In the Oval Office, Biden has a big portrait of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt he knew what he wanted, and he put together sometimes weird coalitions, but he got the votes. He threatened, he bribed, he did whatever he could to move that New Deal agenda forward. President Lyndon Johnson, who obviously prosecuted the racist, immoral Vietnam War, When it came to domestic policy, Lyndon Johnson got things done. Why? He knew what he wanted. He wanted the Voting Rights Act, and he put together a coalition of moderate Republicans, Democrats. He got rid of the Dixiecrats, and he got it done. If Biden wants to be a successful president and avoid losing the House and the Senate in 2022, he's got to get things done. He's got to get things done in the next few months. So he's got to get Manchin and Sinema and the two from New Hampshire and get them in the room and explain to them why the infrastructure jobs bill has to be this big and why you have to tax corporations and the wealthy and how popular that is and how that's even popular in Arizona and West Virginia. He's got to twist arms. It's up to Biden, because remember, with budget reconciliation, how did they pass the American Rescue Act on coronavirus? They did it through budget reconciliation. They had 50 Democratic votes plus Kamala Harris casting the deciding vote. Clearly, with the jobs plan, everyone knows they can do that. It's a budget. It's basically a budget bill. And they need to forget the negotiations with Republicans, which I'm not sure would ever pass anyhow, because you need 60 votes. But you could do budget reconciliation with just the 50 votes plus one. So I believe progressive activists, and there are some good economists in the Biden administration that I mean, Jared Bernstein is one. He's a progressive. He's one of us. And he's a top Biden advisor. He's got to get Biden to get in the face of Sinema, Manchin, and several others and say, no, we're going big. We don't want to have a decisive defeat in 2022, and we have to deliver now before the election ramps up.
Next question. What should Chuck Schumer be doing as leader of the Senate as far as getting all the Dems on board, re the filibuster, voter suppression, ...
Yeah, good question. I believe Schumer's been far better than Biden. People, you know, and I've been a Schumer, I live in New York. I've been a Schumer critic my whole life, but he's really been good in the last few months. And people think it's because the media talks about how AOC is going to run against Schumer in the Senate. And she's not. But he's become very close with Bernie Sanders. And Schumer keeps tweeting publicly. I know he's saying privately, but he's publicly sort of embarrassing Biden and saying, President, you have it in your power to stimulate the economy and help working families by foregoing federal student debt and do it up to $50,000 per person who's carrying that debt. So I think Schumer's been quite good. Schumer was instrumental in the American Rescue Act that passed with the 50 votes plus one. And I think Schumer is putting more pressure, but I think the weak link here is Biden. He's old, he's weak, and he really isn't progressive. So it's about, he needs to feel the heat from the ground up.
Let's see. Any thoughts on Merrick Garland and going after Trump? Seems like he's not interested and would rather some Tish James and Cy Vance to do the heavy lifting. Yeah. And as an immigration attorney, I just have to say that Merrick Garland, AG Merrick Garland, reversed a couple of very bad decisions that Barr had done last year that applied in relation to asylum. But anyways,
I mean, reversing Trump's hundreds and hundreds of bad things is pretty easy to do. But if all you do is go back to the Obama-Biden status quo, we lose in 2020. You got to do more. So Merrick Garland is making the same mistake that Obama made, that Clinton made, which is they get into power and they say, we're looking forward, we're not looking back. We're not. So, I mean, you had the crimes of Iran-Contra that were never resolved because Clinton said, I'm looking forward, I'm not looking back. I'm not going to deal with that. So you have these problems fester. Obama did the same thing when he came into power. And so I'm assuming their attitude is, Yeah, leave it to the DA of Manhattan, who's Cyrus Vance, who's pretty good, or good on these issues, I should say. Hasn't been great on mass incarceration or criminal justice reform. Leave it to Letitia or State Attorney General. I think something's got to happen there. But again, Trump has got so much popularity with his phony populism that I'm not sure that indictments would slow down the Trump train. But I do believe that the Democrats in the White House always make the mistake of letting the criminals from the previous administration go. And the biggest mistake that Holder made, and he was sort of a corporate attorney who became Obama's attorney general, was they didn't prosecute any of the Wall Street criminals. And that would have really changed things. Again, that Obama, Biden, they're not exactly populists. They're more comfortable with corporatists, with corporate leaders than they are with the working class and people that are struggling, and certainly more comfortable with corporatists than left-wing activists. And but if they'd listen more to progressive activists, they might win.
All right, just a note that I'm focusing on questions now. So if you put a comment in the chat, Jeff will receive a copy of the comments later, but I'm not going to read them at this time. So what is the best way to influence Biden?
Well, I think a lot of you are with rootsaction.org. If you aren't, go to the website, rootsaction, one word, .org. Give us your email address and your zip code, and we will have you mobilizing around your two senators to do something about the filibuster. Mobilize your two senators to put heat on Biden on every single thing I've mentioned so far tonight. So it's got to be done collectively. People's Action is doing some great pressure on Biden. Working Families Party is doing some great pressure. Sunrise Movement is doing some great pressure. Some of the pressure we brought to bear even before they took office is why some of the appointments are a little better than they would have been. So unified pressure is the key. I mean, we just had this bloodletting, the massacre in Gaza, where hundreds more civilians are killed, all these children are killed. And you had this letter that was written by AIPAC, that's the Israel Right or Wrong Lobby, and signed by all these Democrats as well as Republicans. And when we saw some of the names on that list of who had signed this atrocious letter, basically saying unlimited funds to Israel, we will stand with Israel no matter what. I mean, Israel, goes rightist, fascist over the last 40 years. And yet you still have the power of AIPAC, the Israel Right or Wrong Lobby. So I'll tell you, when we saw something like that, and we saw Ro Khanna, he's been an ally of Roots Action. We've worked with him like hand in glove. And when we saw his name on that, we generated so much heat because Ro knows better. And when Ro got all this from his district, I mean, that's the thing, that Roots Action can mobilize within a district and within a state. But Ro Khanna all of a sudden changed his tune and was very critical of what Israel had done in Gaza. And your Congress member, who's one of the best ones, Andy Levin, he was on that letter. And the only way this guy is going to improve is if he hears from you. He can't just hear praise. That's the wrong mistake. That's the mistake that progressives make with Democrats, is when their Democratic representatives do good things, they praise them. But when the their Democratic representatives do bad things, they go silent. Andy Levin's name on the AIPAC letter is inexcusable, and you guys should formally protest. I'm telling you, what we did with Ro Khanna in Northern California, and Ro and Andy are close. Ro really got vociferous against Israel's war crimes.
Okay. Do you suggest that Biden should resign because he is flawed and imperfect? I doubt that any of us could come up with a perfect alternative that can satisfy every critic.
No, I'm not
So,
talking about
anyway.
resigning.
Okay. American Families Plan cut child poverty in half. Shouldn't Biden and Harris do rallies in Detroit, Atlanta, etc.?
Again, that's what they need to do. They need to do rallies in West Virginia and Tucson and Phoenix, where there are these corporate Democrats. You need to get out there and campaign for the jobs plan and campaign for the families plan. The families plan is a wonderful education and anti-poverty plan. It's not going anywhere. The first thing on their agenda is the infrastructure, the jobs plan, and they can't compromise it away. And they need to get, Biden, I'm not asking for him to resign. We fought our asses off to have Biden defeat Trump. He's the president. But, he's got the portrait of Franklin Roosevelt in his office. Franklin Roosevelt transformed the system in the direction of working class people. And that's what we need. And anything short of that, the phony populists on the right wing are going to win again in 2022. So yeah, there've been some great plans, but they're exactly one legislative achievement so far, and that's the rescue plan.
Speaking of Trump, his base, and the Republicans, how can they be stopped from remaking American politics?
You have to defeat them at every election. And that's the gist of what I've been talking about. That if you deliver, why do I say vacillation, hesitation, corporatism will lose the next election? History proves it. I mean, look at Hillary. She was running against the most unpopular candidate, major party candidate in the history of our country, Trump, and she lost. And we know why she lost. And it wasn't because of Putin. She lost because poor people, young people, voters of color did not get out and vote in places like Philadelphia, where Pennsylvania was narrowly lost, Detroit, where Michigan was narrowly lost, Milwaukee, where Wisconsin was narrowly lost. White working class voters who had voted for Obama, some of them twice, some of them had voted for Bernie, they flipped over to Trump. So if you deliver progressive policy and you really make working people's lives better, including people that are only occasional voters, whatever their color, if you deliver and make their lives better, young people who generally vote at lower levels, they'll get out and vote for you. They'll vote Democratic. People of color, poor people will get out and vote for you if you make their lives better. Working class people, union members will not only get out and vote, they'll activate for you. And even some white working class swing voters that voted for Obama and swung to Trump, they'd swing back to the Democrats. They're non-ideological. They don't always vote, but when they do vote, they swing. And they would swing back to the Democrats if the Democrats actually delivered and made their lives fundamentally better. And the jobs plan could do that. Foregoing student debt would do a lot also for people under 50.
That's it for the questions in the chat.
You want to have people raise their hand?
Yep, so if you can find the raise your hand icon, if you click on participants, I believe it's there. Or just type your name in the chat and I'll call you. And if there's nothing, Jeff can have his after dinner drink early.
I answer that last question. This is going to sound like a broken record to any of you who have heard me speak before, but you should all be watching Fox News. I know it's not easy. I know it's not glamorous, but Fox News runs the Republican Party. And all of the harebrained crap that they say there, just like Rush Limbaugh played such a huge role in leading the Republican Party. talk radio, Fox News, One America News, Newsmax. If you want to understand the right wing and the Trump voters, there's no way of understanding them if all you listen to is NPR or all you do is read The Nation. You'll have no clue. Because if you get all of your information from Fox News, where they regularly, by the way, denounce the corporate media, and they talk about the Democrats being the party of big tech and big corporations, and they give you this phony populism. We're on the side of the middle class, the working class, the elitists, the elite liberals. They're out there in Silicon Valley and Hollywood and Wall Street. We're against those forces. So you have to understand that Trump has had a big role in it, but so did Hannity. Tucker Carlson played a big role in it. They've really honed their populism in the way that European racist populism has grown. If you're not paying attention to what's on Fox News, I encourage everyone to watch at least a half hour a day. Because they have a different worldview, but it's more coherent than MSNBC. It's more coherent than CNN. You know, MSNBC, CNN, they talk about systemic racism, but they never name the corporate forces that are enforcing systemic racism. It's a muddle. They talk about how great Biden is, and they never tell you anything negative. Almost never, or to the degree that there's anything negative on MSNBC and especially CNN, why can't they forge a bipartisan consensus? I mean, it's a muddle. And I think a lot of liberals are confused because they get that news. You get your news from Fox News, you're not confused in terms that you have a coherent worldview. You're completely detached from reality. You're confused about reality. But there's a very coherent worldview. And I know I started saying it to your group years ago. You have to watch Fox News. They've never been more important than they are today.
Still no questions and no raised hands.
Maybe people should raise their hand physically because they don't know how to do it.
All they got to do is type their name in the chat, and they know how to use the chat because it's been used.
I see Linda's hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Linda.
You've got to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
So anyway, now let's see if I can remember my question. I just wanted you to go back to talking about Trump's base and kind of explore that a little bit more. I mean, if Biden were to move more forcefully to get the rich to pay their taxes, that would have a big influence on, would that have an influence on the base and change their minds?
Yeah, well, you got to differentiate. Trump's base is the traditional, you know, well-off Republicans, country club set. But what he added in 2016 and far more in 2020 was working class whites, true swing voters, many of whom voted for Obama. So would it have impact on those people that are not Trump fanatics, but they voted for him? Yes, have a positive impact in influence, especially if you deliver jobs. The jobs plan will deliver jobs. The foregoing federal student loan debt would really boost many, many families. I mean, there's 45 million people are holding this debt. So if you affect the lives of millions of people, even if your life isn't affected, your neighbor's life, you'll see something happening around you. So the hardcore Fox News, those 5, 10, 20 million people, no, they're gone. But, he got 70 million votes. He got the second most amount of votes that any candidate has gotten after Biden. So there are millions of people, I think, all the polls show it. I mentioned the Marist poll, which is quite new, where they explained Biden's jobs plan, the so-called infrastructure bill. And it was popular across the board, majority. And then they said, and this jobs plan will be paid for by an increase on taxes on big corporations and the super wealthy, and the popularity shot up. When Elizabeth Warren talked about her wealth tax during the campaign, and the corporate media, not just Fox, but MSNBC and CNN, oh, it's not workable. They quoted all these corporatists and how it's not workable. They'll hide their money, blah, blah, blah. They polled for the wealth tax, and among Republicans, more Republicans supported Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax than opposed it. So progressive populism would work. And if there is no progressive populism, if what Biden gives us is sort of, warmed over, incremental, slow change, and the only populism being heard is this dishonest, phony, racist populism from the right wing, well, that's the only populism out there.
Okay, thank you. The other screen named Linda, I can't tell quite who you are.
That's my wife. That's not me.
Obviously. Did you have a question? You're waving your hand.
Yeah. I wanted to know what his take was on Ocasio-Cortez and candidates who run as Democratic Socialists, and what that could mean for the Democratic Party.
Good question. It's taken years off of my life. It's made me young again. If you follow Roots Action, you'll know how close we are with AOC, with Ilhan Omar, with Rashida, your Detroit Congresswoman. We're close with Cori Bush. We've done a lot with Ro Khanna out in California. The squad are all people of color, and most of them are women, and most of them are very young. And I'm not one of these people that believes you should join the Green Party and have a 2% protest candidate, and if you go up from a half a point to 1% or 2%, you call that a big victory. I'm interested in running as a progressive, as a democratic socialist, whatever, and getting elected. And it's happening. We got Jamal Bowman. He's tremendous in New York. Mondaire Jones. I mean, the squad keeps growing, and it's almost all people of color. So it's an exciting development. It's part of the reason that Biden is a little better than he would have been. A big campaign, if you're tuned in with Roots Action, you know that Biden is about to insult the African-American population and the Latino population of Chicago. He's announced that he's going to appoint Rahm Emanuel to be the ambassador to Japan. That's a plum assignment. Rahm Emanuel's been a corporatist his whole life. He covered up murders of African Americans by Chicago police. That's how he got reelected in 2015. It's an abomination. And we've run a national campaign. We're getting articles in Japan about how Rahm Emanuel was abusive to Black neighborhoods, shutting down schools, shutting down clinics in Chicago. And this is who Biden's fighting for. We want Biden fighting for jobs, the American Jobs Plan for millions of workers, not fighting for Rahm Emanuel. And to our delight, members of the squad, they're yelling and screaming, saying, if you appoint Rahm Emanuel to any job in your administration, it's an insult to Black people. Don't talk about Black Lives Matter and then appoint Rahm Emanuel. So it's exciting. Thanks for the question. It's exciting what the squad is doing. They're raising hell. They're trying to reduce the military budget. They're trying to pass the Green New Deal. They're fighting against the filibuster. They're trying to get Democratic senators to stand up to the Republicans and Joe Manchin. It's a new thing. I never believed I would see it. If you had asked me about this in 2016, I'd say you're dreaming. But we have these 8, 10, 12 fighting progressives and democratic socialists.
Rich Peacock?
Thank you. And really good to hear your insights, Jeff. I just learned about HR 2590, Protect the Rights of Palestinian Children and Families. It comes by Betty McCollum out of Minnesota. And it's no U.S. taxpayer funds for annexation, demolition, and so forth. Isn't that something we should push Andy Levin to co-sponsor?
Yes. Roots Action's been very active behind McCollum. She's so brave. She's fought for Palestinian children. She's fighting against human rights abuses against Palestinians, demolitions of Palestinians' homes. And she's been joined by members of the squad. That would be an obvious to ask Andy Levin, where do you stand on that? And we want you to co-sponsor. And please at least take a meeting with McCollum.
Thank you. Chuck? Oops, you have to unmute yourself, Chuck.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Jeff, earlier you were talking about people needing to hold Biden's feet to the fire. I've noticed locally that a lot of people who were active in opposing Trump are now focusing on fighting the voter suppression bills in the state house and the state senate, and also devoting a lot of energy to redistricting in Michigan, with very little energy going toward the federal level. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, good question. Obviously, stopping these horrible racist voter suppression bills is crucial. But I mean, holding Biden's feet to the fire would begin with Joe Biden. You've got to come out and say you're fed up. You've tried to negotiate. You've tried to compromise. You've tried bipartisan. McConnell is basically announced publicly. Just watch Fox News. He's not going to compromise. He's not going to negotiate in good faith. We want you to come out against the filibuster. I mean, if Biden doesn't come out against the filibuster, it's sort of hard to complain about Manchin and Sinema or some of the others. So, and if the filibuster were ended and all you had to deal with was no longer McCollum, but on some of these bills, you're just dealing with bringing in Manchin and Sinema, then it's a totally different parliamentary game. So yes, and obviously the what is it, HR1? You know, there's a bill that's already passed the House that would really strike a blow against voter suppression, would make it easier to vote, not harder to vote, would make gerrymandering more difficult. And it's not going to go anywhere with the filibuster. It's got no chance. So, I mean, that's elementary. I mean, when people say, when they make excuses for Joe Biden because of Manchin and Sinema, I can see they're consciously or subconsciously blocking out what Biden himself says, which is often similar to Manchin and Sinema. So you have to first get Biden to a progressive position, and then he can play that FDR LBJ role and try to get, you know, the few straggling corporate Democratic senators in line.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Valerie?
Hi, I really appreciate what you've been saying, Jeff. It's really encouraging, getting the good information. And your comment about supporting of the Jobs Act and student loans and other bills that would really help people reminded me of something that Ibram Kendi talked about during the election. And he was referring to the fact that everyone was talking about getting the swing voters and how most people think of the swing voters as white moderates. And he was saying that young Black voters, potential voters, is a much larger swing vote that he calls the second swing vote. Much larger group of people would have a much bigger impact. And I wondered what you thought about that.
I agree completely. When I talk about, I say white working class swing voters, and then I say these other occasional voters, they swing between not voting at all and voting Democratic. That's young voters, it's young Black voters, it's young Latino voters. And there's no doubt it's poor people that vote only occasionally, but you need them to vote for Congress or else the right wing wins. He's on the money. And I've always argued that the Democrats spend too much of their money, and this, I've written volumes about this, that Democratic consultants, they're multimillionaires, whether they win or lose elections, and they tend to lose. And they get paid as a percentage of the ads that they run. So they run tens of millions of dollars of ads that are aimed at, quote, persuadables. These are allegedly Republican moderates. How many goddamn Republican moderates are left after Reagan, Bush, Gingrich, Bush, Trump? I mean, give me a break. The money should have gone to getting out young voters and Black voters and poor voters. That's where the money should go. But these consultants divert all of this money to these stupid ads that are totally ineffective. I mean, the Lincoln Project, liberals were giving the Lincoln Project all this money to peel off Republican votes. Republicans didn't peel off to Biden. So what you need to do is mobilize your base. Young people hate Trump. Young people, even if they're not that political, when they do scientific polls of people under 35, that's the most anti-racist demographic in our country by age, the most anti-sexist, the most pro-gay rights, the most anti-corporate, the most, when they ask people under 35, do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of socialism? Do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of capitalism? They're more favorable to socialism. But a lot of those people don't vote, and they sometimes they're swinging between voting Democratic or staying home because they don't think the Democrats will change anything. Or they swing between voting Democratic or casting a protest vote for the Green Party or something. Those are swing voters. You are right. And if the Democrats delivered and then mobilized those voters, we could win all the elections. We wouldn't have to worry about Fox News anymore because we keep beating them at the polls. You have to beat them like 3-4 times in a row and then deliver. But I mean, let me go on a quick tangent because this will be news to most people because you're in a swing state. But we started rootsaction.org because unlike Rachel Maddow and MSNBC, we don't believe there's one and only one problem holding back the country: right-wing extremism. That's a big problem, but it's not the only problem. There's an equally big problem, and that's the corporatization and corruption of the Democratic Party leadership. Now, when I say these are twin problems, I'm not in any way saying the Democratic leaders are as bad as the right-wing racist Republicans. No, I'm saying in the importance of activists addressing, these are two huge problems. And if you don't address both, you're not going to get anywhere. And so the reason I say corruption and corporatization of the Democratic leadership is, unlike you guys in Michigan, you don't know what it's like to live in a one-party Democratic state. I do. And the other state, my second state, is California, but I live in New York. And when you live in New York, you realize that the assembly, that's our lower house in Albany, the state assembly, dominated by Democrats, a lot of progressives, a lot of DSA influence. Every 2 years, every year, they would pass a single payer health insurance plan for the state of New York. And it wouldn't get out of the Senate because the Republicans controlled, and Cuomo wanted the Republicans to control. Well, lo and behold, because of grassroots organizing, groups like Indivisible, Working Families Party, DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, we took over the Senate. So now it's Democratic in New York. And now they won't let that bill out of committee. Why? Because they don't want to force Cuomo to veto it. So they bottled it up. We are a one-party state. And the health insurance companies still dominate our state. We don't have we don't have Mitch McConnell you can blame things on, or Fox News. We have the New York Post, but again, it's a one-party state. Look to California. Every year, and California's got as many people as Canada. I don't know, you guys are near Canada. I work with all these Canadian filmmakers. They love Medicare for All in Canada, which they've had for decades. And California's got as many citizens as many residents as Canada does. They could have a wonderful single payer Medicare for all in California. And when Schwarzenegger was the governor, a Republican, they got it out of the Senate and the House repeatedly so they could embarrass Schwarzenegger because they knew he would veto it. And then Jerry Brown became the governor. One party state, all Democrats, Democratic House, Democratic, they call it the California Assembly, Democratic Senate, Democrat in the governor's mansion, and they never let it out of committee. Rhode Island, one party state, all Democrats. And a bunch of progressives got the city council of Providence, the biggest city, to pass the $15 minimum wage, which was really great. There's great union activity in Providence, the hotel workers and what have you. And so a bunch of progressives get $15 minimum wage. The Democrats totally control the state government. What did they do? They immediately passed a law saying that no city government can set its own minimum wage. And they did that for corporate interests. So, I mean, if you understand that we have two problems, of course, we always fight, as we did at Roots Action, vote Trump out, then challenge Biden. We were everywhere trying to defeat Trump, and we played a big role, especially in Wisconsin, Arizona. We were also good in Michigan. Ron was over there, I think. Remember, we hired an organizer into Michigan. So you should always defeat the right wing on behalf of even moderate and shitty Democrats. But that's not enough. You then have to deal with the problems of corporate power within the Democratic Party. And that means a lot of times you have to primary people. I would never say primary Andy Levin. He's one of the best. But when he does lousy things, like sign the APAC letter, and apparently he's not a co-sponsor of the McCollum bill, you've got to talk to him and say, look, Andy, we organized for you, we voted for you, we praised you on this and that, but this is unacceptable to us. And if you aren't clear with Democrats, they'll figure, well, I have no problem with the left, I can keep moving right. That's what Democrats do if they don't feel heat from progressives. I can keep moving right or keep moving corporate if they don't feel the heat.
Ron?
I want to go back to the other side of the demographic and the other political side, which you mentioned a couple of times, which has to do with Trump's huge increase from 2016 to 2020. How do you explain, after the pandemic and after everything else that happened, the fact that he got so many more votes?
Part of it is the power of right-wing media. You know, they're reaching millions of people, whether it's QAnon, which is the crazier aspect, or
Crazy.
Fox News, which is millions. Talk radio is tens of millions every day. And it's almost all right-wing except for Thom Hartmann and a couple others. So that's one thing. The other is just old-fashioned racism. The other is elite. The right wing seems to be against the elites. And the Democrats seem to be for the wealthy elites. And my life keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And the right wing is telling me who to blame. and the Democrats are not. And so I'm blaming the Democrats. I mean, phony populism has been working in Europe in the last few years. It's working here. I mean, how many fucking immigrants are come up? Michigan is the reason you don't have, good jobs. But they were able to pull that off. In 2015, even the Republican leaders, they were not talking about illegal immigration. It was Trump. He made that the issue. And now it's all you got. Now I live in upstate New York in a mixed area. There's very left-wing pockets like Woodstock. I live in Saugerties, and on the corner is a guy who was flying up until 2 days ago, Trump 2024 flag. And a few doors closer to me, a few doors from him, a guy put up a flag, a counter, I guess it was counter protest. His flag said, Trump for prison, lock him up. So we have dueling flags on my street. But I noticed that the other day, within the last 2 days, the Trump supporter has taken down his Trump flag and put up an American flag. That might be a step forward for us. I don't know yet. And, I don't want to go over and talk to him. But there's a lot of factors. Race, phony populism, the power of right wing. It's very persuasive. And I mean, raise your hands if you watch a half hour of Fox News every day. Yeah. I mean, Shirley probably has a better idea on what their worldview is. They're getting totally different news. And they are getting people to blame. They know who to blame. It's the elites. It's the corporate media. It's big tech censoring our ideas. So it's
Amazing.
scary, but you could pull away some of those people.
It's amazing, Jeff, that they have so little sense of the capitalist system and the increasing inequality. That's the most amazing thing.
Well, I would argue it doesn't get discussed on MSNBC or CNN too much either. Right. That's why I say Fox News is coherent, MSNBC and CNN is muddled. CNN and MSNBC will sometimes talk about the victims of racism, like George Floyd at the hands of Derek Chauvin. But they will never, and they use the phrase systemic racism, but they'll never talk about the real estate industry, which funds them, the banking industry, Wall Street, which funds these TV networks. They rarely talk even about oil and gas. I mean, think about it. We're at record-breaking temperatures. Where is Biden on this? Biden should be going to the West, right? He should recuperate in DC and go to somewhere in Arizona, which would be a great place because of cinema. They're having 100, 115 degree weather every day. They're breaking records. This is the hottest June in history. So he goes there and says, look, I've been trying to negotiate with the Republicans. And you show him sweating because he'll never take off his blue suit, and his tie. He's sweating. He's in Arizona. It's 110 degrees. Said, I've been negotiating and negotiating. This is it. Time is up. I am going to pass the American Jobs Plan. I'm going to put people to work. And one thing they're going to be doing is green jobs. And it's a winner. And so on MSNBC and CNN, it's all muddled. It's pro-corporate. It pretends to be anti-racist. They never name the villains. They never tell you who's to blame, except for Derek Chauvin. He was very handy. But they never tell you the corporate forces to blame. They never talk about the military budget. It never comes up. On CNN and MSNBC, they think we got to get tougher with the Chinese. When are we going to stand up to Putin finally? It's warmongering. So again, it's a mixed bag. You watch Fox News, you're going to get real propaganda. You're going to get a real coherent worldview. And they get it, and they believe Trump is their savior. Trump has never given a shit about any working class person. He's ripped them all off. He's defrauded every contractor he's ever worked with. Everyone in New York knows that. but people who watch Fox News don't. And so I just feel that, they're running the game. They're the ones talking about income inequality. They're talking about the elites. And the corporate media never does. And Joe Biden rarely does. If he started getting more populist, we'd win big in 2022.
All right.
I see my
That,
cousin.
yes. Oh, Don, go ahead. You're waving your hand like this.
This is nepotism.
Did I raise my hand wrong?
No, there can be no wrong way to raise your hand. Go ahead.
Jeff, the only branch of government you haven't talked about is the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has got a lot of very important cases, most prominently Roe versus Wade. And I mean, what do we do about the fact that, Merrick Garland didn't get a hearing, RGB dies, and all of a sudden we get Amy Coney Barrett. And then Mitch McConnell came out very recently and said, if Biden gets a chance, probably a year or two into at the end of his presidency, we're not going to allow him to appoint a Supreme Court judge. It seems to me that the Republicans are ideologues. They fight, and the Democrats don't. And we have a Supreme Court that's so far tilted to the right because of the Democrats' failure to fight, and the Republicans really fighting for their principles, however bad they are. So, what can we do about that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And there's nothing that, there's no phrase that worries me more. And you hear it on CNN and MSNBC all the time. Court packing. They'll ask Biden, are you supporting court packing? Now, there's the right answer to that is, no, we're trying to unpack the court. When we add 2 or 3 or 4 Supreme Court justices, we're unpacking what Mitch McConnell has done. There used to be a tradition that federal judges could not be appointed if you were within 4 months of an election. But if you were out front of 4 or 5 months of the election, the summer before the November election, then of course the Senate would have to advise and consent. They'd have to hold hearings. So Merrick Garland should have had hearings and been confirmed. And Amy Coney Barrett should not be on the court. And you take away those 2 votes and you give them to Democrats, it's 5-4 Democratic court. So Mitch McConnell, everyone knows, has packed the court. He's done it by throwing out a tradition. I think it used to be called, who was the racist senator? Oh, I think it was called the Strom-Thurmond rule. It was never written down, but it was sort of a tradition that federal court judges, if there were vacancies before the summer, before a November election, you would confirm them. If it was after the summer, no. So Mitch McConnell has 2 right-wingers on that court. It should be a 5-4 Democratic court. So I believe, again, a progressive president, unlike Biden, would have been making this, no, I'm against court packing. That's why I feel we need to add 3 judges. And the number of judges in the Supreme Court has changed many times in US history. Not lately, but it's changed repeatedly. It's gone up, it's gone down. So the right approach for a Democrat is to say, I'm trying to undo the court packing. What they did was immoral, it was illogical, it was unjustifiable, it was indefensible, and that's why we're going to expand the court. We're going to make it what it should have been.
Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? 3 times. Final closing remarks, Jeff?
Well, yeah, it's a thrill to have a peace and justice group that's been going since the Iraq invasion. I'm proud of you. I was proud to stand at the protest for Black Lives Matter outside the church at 11 Mile and Woodward short while ago. I hope to meet you face to face. Keep up your activism. Hold even Andy Levin's feet to the fire, but especially your two Democratic senators are mediocre at best, and they need to be lobbied. We give you, if you join Roots Act, how many of you get the emails from Roots Action? Yeah, if you get the emails, we make it so easy on all these issues I've discussed. Send an email to your two senators by hitting this submit button, and it goes automatically in your name with your address, and it will begin. As a constituent, I want you to put pressure on Joe Biden to do this or that. And we make it easy. So I'm proud to work with you guys, and I'll see you in person hopefully soon.
Thank you so much. Linda, take it away.
Jeff, I just want to say thank you. We're proud of our association with you too. You're inspiring to us. I feel newly inspired again,
Great.
and I was not feeling that way before, so this is good.
All right. I'm
All
going to
right.
say my goodbyes.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you for joining us. Okay. I'm going to end the meeting, but I'll wait because I know some of our steering committee likes to stay on if you want to.
Oh, I'll stop.
What? Does anybody
Stop
want to stay
recording.
on?
Yeah, I just stopped the recording.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.